All right, then Mr. Adegboruwa joins us now. He is a senior advocate of Nigeria. Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. Well, the president did deliver his speech yesterday. There's going to be a phased easing of this lockdown, but different states have still got the measures that they have to take. Well, give us your impression, first of all, on how you received this speech, because many have been looking to see how they'll ease the lockdown, but now some of them have it. What do you think?
Thank you. Good morning. First of all, you will realize that since the lockdown started, there's been a lot of hue and cry from most Nigerians concerning the issue of economic effect of the lockdown. It was already leading to unrest. There were protests in some areas of Lagos, in Ibeju yesterday, and I'm sure across other parts of Nigeria, there's been a lot of agitation concerning the issue of palliatives that are not getting to those who require them. So it was actually anticipated that the president would take some steps to address the concerns of Nigerians concerning the economic effect of the lockdown. But unfortunately, even though it is commendable that the president has taking steps to begin to ease the lockdown, the expectations of Nigerians from the president have likely not been met. A lot of fundamental and critical issues have left, the president has left unaddressed. And this is creating concern, especially on the economy. You know, prior to COVID-19, the president had set up a presidential economic team which he said will be reporting to him directly. After the COVID-19 experience of Nigeria, the president also set up another team which was to look at the economic issues post-COVID-19 and respond to how Nigeria will be able to tackle them. And both committees are supposed to be working. The president has not alluded to the responsibilities of these committees. But most importantly, as other speakers have raised this morning, prior to the presidential broadcast, the aides of the president told us that the president met with the Minister of Health and the Director General of the National Center for Disease Control to take briefings from them. Now, these two officers of government had earlier informed Nigerians that they were desperately searching for testing kits and that we're already out of stock in respect of these valuable reagents. So the president didn't address what is being done to ramp up the testing. In a population of 200 million people, for over 1 month, we have only tested 10,000, which is just scratching the surface. Out of these 10,000, we have had over 1,000 testing positive, given about 10%. So by the time we're going to test 200 million people, it will probably take eternity. So something has to be done urgently to be able to ramp up the testing mechanism to ensure that more Nigerians are tested. Because the consequence of this is that there are many more people out there who are walking around the streets and who are having the symptoms and they are not being tested and they are spreading it. And then, Chamberlain, the other point is the economic effect of this lockdown. The private sector has been off for close to a month or more. So the issues of salaries, job losses, pay cuts, when eventually this lockdown is eased, is something to be addressed. You know, how will people get paid?
We'll examine some of these issues that you've raised and more when we come back in just a moment. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Well, some of the highlights of the president's speech, which he delivered yesterday concerning the phased easing of the lockdown of the concerning the coronavirus. He did say new measures will be announced. He didn't announce new measures actually, but from the 4th of May, we begin to see that phased lockdown. Remember, particularly, it was actually Lagos, FCT, and Ogun, but Kano eventually got on board. So they will have to experience this for 2 weeks. So that will be full lockdown. I think the Kano State government even were doing something in that regard. So there will be curfew between 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. and this means that all movements will be prohibited during this period except for essential services. Interstate travel ban, the states already spoke to that. They suggested that that should be done. The president upheld that. Interstate goods, partial and controlled interstate movement of goods and services will be allowed for the movement of goods and services from producers to consumers. Remember, Labour also did touch on that. But then this, mandatory use of face masks, strictly ensure the mandatory use of such or coverings in public, in addition to maintaining physical distancing, not just in text, but physical distancing and personal hygiene. This is where we, as citizens, will have a huge role to play. State governments, corporate organizations, and philanthropists are encouraged to support the production of cloth masks for citizens. Then, as earlier highlighted, Kano, there will be total lockdown for a period of 2 weeks, and this is effective immediately. So he spoke about public gatherings. The restriction on social and religious gatherings shall remain in place. And then state governors may choose to adopt and expand based on their unique circumstances, provided they maintain alignment with the guidelines issued above, as he said. But regarding some of the issues Mr. Adegboruwa did raise about testing, the president did say the Nigeria Center for Disease Control has accredited 15 labs across the country with an aggregate capacity to undertake 2,500 tests per day. I also understand now we have a capacity for about 50,000 store capacity, but we're not making use of that yet. But Mr. Adegboruwa, if I could get back to you on this one. The NCDC did speak to this yesterday as well. After the message they put out, he did say they've received massive support and help from different people, Nigerians, some of whom doesn't even know who they are. So having highlighted that, does that address the issues you raised concerning what is going to be done about them looking for test kits?
Well, I do commend the NCDC and all our frontline workers, but what is the realistic situation on the ground in Nigeria is that there's a huge disparity between what goes out to the media and what is actually happening on the ground. There are several people who are showing the symptoms and who don't have the opportunity of being tested. There are people who called these phone numbers, there are no responses. You read about the case of the lawyer in Lagos who kept calling, and there was no response. By the time the evacuation ambulance got there, it was too late, and he died. And I think this is the reality that is going on. And I do agree that there's need for some kind of cooperation with the government to combat this novel virus. But I think that the government has to come out to share correct information with the people. And also, we get reports that a lot of people are being discharged from the various treatment centers. So what is the treatment being administered to them? Would it be proper for government to meet with the Nigerian Medical Association to work out a mechanism whereby private hospitals can be properly trained and people can get treatment? Because there seems to be lack of capacity to address the entire situation. And then when you go to the presidential broadcast, there's a curfew imposed from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. Lagos is the commercial capital of Nigeria. This curfew is not in tandem with the traffic situation in Lagos, where people are up as early as 4 a.m. They are coming from Ogun State, they are coming from Oyo State. And then with the traffic situation, people are on the road till 12 midnight. So when you say you impose a curfew on a city like Lagos from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m., you're virtually telling them not to go out, because there's nobody in Lagos that is off the road by 8 p.m. who is working. But this is the private sector of Nigeria. Okay,
but if I could follow up on that, isn't that where, because first of all, let's not forget that they already said interstate movement won't happen. So they may not necessarily have to come from Ogun State unless essential services and those selected businesses that will be allowed. But concerning those curfew, isn't it where the states, because he did make reference to some of that in his statement, isn't where the states have now got to come in and then work this out and see how do we ensure that this suits us. Because I don't think that if the state approach them or approach the center with their own recommendations, I'm not sure it will be rebuffed.
The states will have the discretion to modify the regulations of the president. But the point I'm emphasizing is the need for consultations, especially with the governors of the states before a major broadcast like that will come up. And as you can see, the president has advised all of us to embrace the use of face masks, which is really ideal and commendable. But where do we get them? The face masks. The prices have gone up. So my suggestion, therefore, is that the president should consult with the governors for them to make a sacrifice to cut off their security votes. Governors are locked in their offices, they are locked in their houses, nobody is moving, there's no need for security for our public officers now. So it is time for them to make sacrifices for our people. The huge money allocated for the security of governors, of presidents, of public officials should be donated to the people to produce masks so that we can get them free. It's important because everybody is making sacrifices. And then we don't expect our governors who are in isolation now to still be appropriating security vote onto themselves when they're not moving anywhere. So that's what I'm saying, that there's need for sacrifice on the part of our leaders. And then the second point, Chamberlain, which has not been addressed by the president, is that the National Assembly is resuming today. I presume that these are public officers and who are also Nigerians. I don't think they have special immunity against the virus, except they have developed and they have not told us. So if a critical aspect of Nigeria, like the National Assembly, is resuming, the executive is working, why do we lock the courts? Why don't you unbundle the judicial system? We can't keep the court locked up, without some functional method of graduating and opening system that will enable Nigerians to have access to justice. Law is second to humanity. No society can properly be governed without law. So to that extent, as long as the police is working, as long as the law enforcement officers are working, people are being arrested, are being arraigned and charged before mobile courts, they are entitled under the Constitution to a counsel of their own choice. But when you lock up the lawyers and we have no access to move around, then you deny people justice.
Don't you think that he made allowance for that, where he now says, well, selected, albeit businesses, will be required to open? So wouldn't that be some consideration for the judiciary? It was the CJN too who had made that announcement. Then the AGF is also there to weigh in if need be. But overall, looking at the bigger picture, how concerned are you that, look, in spite of all of these measures, because all these measures that they're putting in place is to ensure primarily that we don't get overwhelmed by coronavirus, because if we do, we know the condition of our health system and all the others. So aren't you concerned, or how concerned are you that, wait a minute, all these measures, will they, and we hope that they are that effective, and we hope that the people comply to a large extent, such that we don't get overwhelmed, because if all else fails, this is not going to be good.
Well, I think that we have made the sacrifices so far. The level of compliance from the people of Nigeria has been quite commendable. Churches are closed, mosques are closed, businesses are closed. I'm sure the areas of breach that we experience are just likely from people who do daily work to earn a living and couldn't endure the hunger for that long. But the real economic sector of Nigeria, we have cooperated with the president, we have cooperated with our leaders and remain at home. And so the point is that so far, I must say that we must commend Nigerians for the support they have granted and given to the president and the governors. So to that extent, it should be an opportunity for the government to revisit our health system. The head of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, the Secretary to the Federal Government, said that he now has seen that the health sector is likely uncatered for. In Ghana, during this COVID-19 period, 90 world-class hospitals are being established. It's an opportunity for our leaders to revisit our health sector, the tertiary, the immediate, and all the hospitals that government is involved in, so that we can equip them and say that this is the legacy and lesson of this COVID-19 era. But that's not being done presently. and it's important that people have access to healthcare. So to that extent, if you look at a lockdown for 1 month, and then we have only done 10,000 tests, I very much doubt whether we're achieving so much in terms of the sacrifice that Nigerians have given. So if we have to get this COVID-19 dealt with as we all desire, then the president has to come up with more measures that will address issues relating to ramping up the tests, so that the sacrifices of staying at home will not be in vain. It's important.
Well, two other things that the president mentioned in that speech, security and the personnel. He referred to cases of human rights abuses by security agencies and all of that. And then he also spoke about palliatives and how they have been distributed. Now, you said earlier, you mentioned something about that earlier, about how the palliatives have been distributed or are being distributed. Now, many citizens live in states and the Federal Capital Territory with various governments, the state governments and their own houses of assembly and all of that. And you would agree that the major challenge that have been recorded over time concerning the distribution of these palliatives is data. Many people are quarreling with the National Social Register and how the register has been arrived at and all of that. Now, we have agencies in charge of data in Nigeria, the Nigeria Identity Management Commission, and then the National Bureau of Statistics, which is a product of the Federal Office of Statistics and the National Data Bank. Do you see a situation where maybe some legal adjustment by the legislature, an amendment of the law that set up the NBS and the NIMC, where the states can come up with the number of people that live within them so that we can quickly come up with this data in a way that, should we have any need, we can quickly refer to this national data per states, so that we can quickly be able to answer some of the issues of palliatives and social investment or social welfare for our people. What do you think?
First of all, Ayo, I think that it is a misnomer for us to centralize issues like data. The government has already centralized census. To that extent, the states should be allowed some measure of freedom to determine the constituent units of their respective states. In Lagos, for instance, there's an agency that was set up during the regime of Governor Raji Fashola, which went around the entire state to try to collect the figures of people who are resident in the state, whether you are an indigene or you are just a resident. So I don't think it is proper for us to nationalize issues like the figures of people resident in some states. The governors have our figures. I mean, I can tell you, between January and March, the government knows how to reach my office to ask me to pay tax. I get correspondence from the Lagos State Internal Revenue Service asking me to pay tax. They were able to reach me when they needed money. So if it is time for us to give palliatives to our people, we shouldn't be using data as an excuse. The various community development associations, the market associations, the mass-based entities, the Christian and Muslim associations, the students' unions, they have opportunity to get across these people and civil society to be able to distribute this palliative in a way that it can be transparent, in a way that it can go around. There's no way you share food with people in a community that they will not know. I've been going around Lekki Phase 1 and other Lekki entities. It's only been private individuals who are setting up food banks to cater for the needy. We don't see the evidence or impact of the so-called palliative. They are only in the media. I'm telling you, because we go around these communities and the shanties to be able to take care of them. We buy food on our own and cook them and assemble people to distribute. We don't see the impact of the so-called palliative from government. And you can see the controversy between the federal and the southwest states. Some states are claiming that the grains that were sent to them have expired and they are not good for human consumption. These are issues that are important for us to address before we start to extend the lockdown or consider some other measures that will not address the real issues that people are facing. And secondly, Ayo, as you can see, there must be some incentive to the private sector. That is the real economy. The SMEs. I mean, by the time we go through this COVID-19 pandemic, you can be sure a lot of people will lose their jobs. People will not be paid salaries. This should be the focus of government through the CBN to work out a measure by which you can inspire the economy by ministering to the private sector, the manufacturing sector, the small-scale industries? What do we do to pending loans? And the president should be specific. They are not matters that you leave to the discretion of individuals, because it will be subject to abuse, as we have seen in the past 1 month. So before you make this broadcast, there must be consultations with the private sector, and then be able to give us guidelines that people can run with, and then we begin to jumpstart and inspire the economy. That is the major challenge. COVID-19 is just a distraction to the economic woe that we're going to face because of the drop in oil prices. And that's what I expect the president to have addressed in his speech.
Well, we do hope that the PTF in the coming days will try to clear the air on some of these gray areas. But, you talked about being specific. And looking through that, through the president's address, you see point 39, the president said the nationwide measures. And then point 40 went on to say, for the avoidance of doubt, the restriction continues in the FCT, Ogun, and Lagos. Don't forget that. Before that, he said nationwide measures, and then he goes specific. And there's a challenge here about jurisdiction. We've seen states adopting measures that work for them. In fact, the president also went on to say, states can adopt what works for them based on their uniqueness. But then he went on to put on a caveat saying that provided they maintain alignment with the guidelines issued above. A lot of issues here and there. How do we harmonize this? How do we ensure that states don't say, well, this works for me, but it's not in the president's address, so I won't go that way? Do you see a major challenge there?
Well, as you can see, the National Assembly is resuming today. It gives the opportunity for the president and the governors to put heads together with the National Assembly, and come up with a uniform law that will synchronize all these regulations to avoid ambiguity. I do not agree with you that the president was specific. He was just speaking, esoteric. He was just speaking in ambiguity. There's no detail there. But the resumption of the National Assembly today will give us the opportunity for them to harmonize a uniform law that can speak to the issues, so that we don't leave people to fill in the gaps, because that's where the abuses occur. So I think it's important that we realize that unless we put heads together to address the major fears of our people, we continue to run with doubt. We continue to run with the discretion.
Then this one, just before we go, after this speech, we expect the PTF COVID-19 to then go ahead and give those specificity where necessary, because they are the ones who are running some of these things, and the state governors as well. But we do remember that it was the CJN who announced the shutting down of the courts for initial 2 weeks. Even lawyers, some of them, including the ones in FCT, did commend him at the time. But speaking about the courts, we know the court is a public place. What changes would you like to see in the courts moving forward?
It will be clear that we will need to quickly clear the backlog of the appellate cases. In the Supreme Court and in the Court of Appeal, your physical presence is not required to argue your case. Your client or the appellant or the respondent are not required to be there physically. So to that extent, we could deploy technology to clear the backlog of cases that have been pending in the Supreme Court and in the Court of Appeal. Now, in the High Courts, we can take interlocutory applications that do not require physical presence of the parties, and matters that relate to documentary evidence. And then also in criminal cases, we could take application for bail in order to decongest the prisons and tackle awaiting trial cases that do not require long appearance of witnesses. So to that extent, while this lockdown is on, the courts should deploy technology through Skype, through Zoom, to clear the backlog of cases. But the physical appearance of lawyers and their clients in court, we cannot afford that now. When you go to the Federal High Court, there are courts that people have to stand outside or sit together, and there's no way you can determine who has the virus or who has been cleared. So
it will be interesting to see, because sometimes when some of these cases are joined, if the judge is not able to make it, they could Skype from his location, as you suggested. But we'll see how that plays out. But we do thank you very much indeed for talking to us this morning, Mr. Adegboruwa, Senior Advocate of Nigeria. All right, so we'll be back, and let's see what you are talking about in a moment. Don't go away.